One of the most difficult things, now of course there's lots of difficult things, but one of the most difficult things in life that's also a stomach churning kind of a thing is being a person who exercises discipline, who brings about discipline upon the life of somebody. Now, parents, if you think about this, you know what this is like, right? Maybe parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. You have cute little Johnny who's in your life, or cute little Susie who's in your life, and Johnny and Susie, they are cute little kids, but they also are cute little sinners, aren't they? They're just cute little sinners. And it kind of goes like this, right? Parents, it's like, it's time for dinner, it's time for bed, or whatever it is, and you say to your child, it's like, it's time to pick up, it's time to put away your toys. And this is what it really begins to hurt. The kid, like Johnny, responds by acting like he didn't even hear anything that you had to say. Or Johnny picks up the truck that he's playing with after you say another time, hey, it's time to pick up. He picks up the truck and he throws it at you. And as a parent, you're just like, I can't believe my kid just did that. Like, and you feel this sense of disobedience and disrespect. It makes you feel sick inside. Or maybe it's little Susie, and you tell Susie, hey, before you go off to the rest of your activities the rest of the day, after dinner here, I want you to help me with the dinner dishes. And you turn around to clean out the casserole pan, and you're scrubbing it, and you look back, and she's gone. She snuck out. And as a parent, she's like, I can't believe my daughter just did that. Or it's John, he's got keys. He's grown up, and you say to John, hey, I know you're headed out to hang out tonight with your friends. Before you go, would you do me a favor and please take care of a few of the piles that are in your room and clean those up? We got family coming in for the weekend, and it'd just be nice if it was picked up a little bit. And the next thing you know, you hear the car start, and the car pull out of the garage, and down the road it goes. And as you walk the bedroom, it's the same way it was when you asked John to clean it up. And as a parent who walks through that stuff, you feel that sense of disrespect and also frustration, and perhaps you get angry, or maybe you just put your head into your hands, and you're just, the disrespect just hurts you. It cuts deep. And as you're reflecting on this, you're like, I got to do something. I can't allow this child to continue, or this young man or young woman to continue this behavior. They need to be disciplined. And you think through ways to provide corrective measures. Anybody been there, right? Any parents been there? Any aunt, uncle, grandparent been there, right? You know what that feels like. Hold on to that feeling. Now, I want you to go back in life to when you were a little kid, or maybe a teenager, and you were on the other end, and you received the corrective discipline. Now, that may bring back some bad memories because your parent or your teacher or whomever was abusive and did not provide a loving corrective discipline. It was abuse. And that's not what I'm talking about. But what I want you to think about is perhaps there was a time in life when you were lovingly and correctly disciplined, and it helped you. I can think back when I was in elementary school, late elementary school, 7th grade. And the teacher said, hey guys, I got to go to the principal's office. I'll be back in just like 2 minutes. Nobody's allowed to get out of their seat. And the teacher opens the door, leaves the classroom, and I get hit in the back of the head with an eraser. So, this is going to be fun. So I pick up the eraser, I throw it back, right? And so there's this little eraser war, and there's erasers flying. People are ripping the little, back in the day when there was pens, erasers, and you actually used them in class instead of computers and all that, right? And there's these little erasers. Well, one flew by me, and I had to get it to throw it back. So I got out of my chair, and just as I got out of the chair, guess what happens? The door opens, in comes the teacher, and I'm busted, right? I'm busted. Teacher says, Kirk, out in the hallway. So I go out in the hallway, and out he comes with 3/4 inch piece of wood that's like 6 inches wide, like 20 inches long with a handle on it, right? It's this big wooden paddle. Now, I know that kind of discipline today might create all kinds of questions and problems, and I'm not here to talk about that form of discipline, but instead to talk about the corrective nature of that discipline. So he comes out with that paddle, and he goes and he knocks on the door of one of my favorite teachers. Like, he's going to do this, like this is the procedure. You can do this in front of other people so that you're not accused of abusing somebody, right? And so I see my favorite teacher, I look into her eyes, and I was like, oh man, this is This is embarrassing, right? Teacher says, bend over, grab your ankles, swat, you get that. And then he says, you need to go home and talk to your parents. The shame of that whole experience, right, was I disappointed my teacher. I disappointed both of my teachers. I know that the exercise of discipline was not done out of animosity. It was not done out of anger. It was not done anything but out of love to correct me. I knew that. I knew that about these teachers. And then I had to go home and talk to my parents. And I ended up with more discipline, right, in which I had to load and unload the dishwasher for the entire week all myself. That discipline, I remember. I can articulate all the details of that. And it had an effect moving forward upon my behavior in the classroom. Can you identify with that? And now as an adult, all life, you've been corrected, and that's been helpful. So like the parent story is like a parent or an adult who's got to exercise the discipline, right? And it's the sense of, I don't want to do this. I don't want to, it hurts me. You know, you heard your parents probably say that, right? It hurts me to discipline you. But it's true, it does. But you know you got to do it. And you do it, why? Because the corrective discipline helps you to live in a right way. Now, we tend to think of discipline only as children, but the reality is it also happens with adults, does it not? I'm a Buffalo Bill fan. Josh Allen was fined this past week, I don't know, $20,000 for his celebration in the end zone last week in a game. You know, like every week the NFL hands out fines for players who hit inappropriate, you know, in a way that the NFL doesn't want you to hit. Take a major sporting event. Coaches discipline their players too, right? You know, show up late for practice, or you have an attitude, so you don't start the game, you get benched. Why? The coach is trying to get it through your head to change your behavior. Because there's rules. There's ways that this is going to function. Today, what we're going to talk about is a pretty difficult and uncomfortable topic of discipline, disciplining adults. Discipline within the church. So we started a series several weeks ago, the title of which is Cultivating Meaningful Relationships. And we've said there's this vision that we have in life, that people have, or this longing, and we probably don't think about it a whole bunch, but we have this longing, this desire to be connected meaningfully in relationship. Not to just be associated with people, that's good and that's okay, but we want something meaningful, we want something deep, and we've talked about that in terms of being a place where people know you and you're known and where you're cared for, and people come along and support you while you're going through hard things in life. Or it's also a place where we find accountability. People come to us and say, hey, the way you're living isn't the right way. So we said, this is the vision, right? And then we said, we're working through the book of 1 Corinthians because this book addresses the cultivation of meaningful relationship from the lens of all the things that get in the way of meaningful relationship, all the problems. There's all these things that prevent us from experiencing that. And today, what we're going to look at is the problem of sin, sexual sin, of a kind that not even the culture around, but there's a person within the church who needs to be disciplined, needs to be corrected. And how do you do that? So if you have a Bible, I invite you to join me in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 5. If you don't, that's fine. You can just kind of follow along on the side screens. And so here we go. Here's what Paul has to say to this church. He says, it is actually reported. In other words, there's a report that's been circulating. You are aware of it. It's actually been reported on. I mean, this is public knowledge. There's lots of people who know about this. It's actually been reported so much so that it's gotten to me, and I'm not even living with you. Remember, this is a group of people whom he spent a year and a half with, day in, day out, talking with them, teaching them, introducing them to Jesus. Some of them became followers of Jesus, and he's teaching them the way to live life. And then he leaves town. And so he's starting other churches and other places. And he says, it's actually reported. I'm getting word that there is a sexual immorality among you, and of a kind of sexual immorality. That doesn't, in the English, a kind of sexual immorality. Sexual immorality is not in the English, but so the original language says the word for sexual immorality is porneia, and it means sexual activity, lots of various kinds of sexual activity. And it's immoral or outside the bounds of what God has established. So it's sexual activity outside the bounds that God has established. And there's a kind of this kind of sexual activity that's taking place outside the bounds that God has established. It's a kind of sexual activity that even the culture around you doesn't even participate in. He says it's a kind that does not even occur among the pagans. Pagan it's kind of has a slur feel to it today. If we use that language, it's a diminutive term. It's the Greek word ethnos, which is the same word that we get ethnic from, meaning culture, right? The flavor of, the structure of, the culture, the way that people interact, a certain culture interacts. His point is, there's a guy living in your church who's behaving in a way that not even the rest of the world, who's not followers of Jesus, don't even behave. It's such an egregious kind of sexual sin. And then he goes on, he says this in verse 2, and you're proud of it. You're proud of it. You're puffed up. It's the word means like a billow of smoke. You open the fireplace and some smoke comes back out and it goes right up. You're proud of it. You're walking around the church. We found a new way to participate in sex that even the world doesn't participate in. Paul says this, shouldn't you rather have been filled with grief? Shouldn't you have been filled with grief and have put out of your fellowship the man who did this? Now, even though I'm not physically present, I'm with you in spirit. Even though I'm not physically present, I'm with you in spirit. The idea is this, like, I have two boys that are at college, out at Grove City College. And every week I have a conversation with them. So a lot of times it's through text, but sometimes communication tools today are so fantastic, right? You can actually talk to them face to face. And so I'll have these conversations that are face to face. And sometimes it's just like celebrating things that are going on in their life. Sometimes it's encouraging things. Sometimes it's helping them process things. Sometimes it's a little bit of admonition. Like you need to kind of focus on this, or and it's as though, because it's face to face, it's as though I am there with them. I'm present with them. Paul's saying, like, hey, while I'm over here in Ephesus, and my spirit is with you over there in Corinth. It's like I'm present with you. I care about what's going on. Even though I'm not there, I'm with you in spirit. And I have already passed judgment on the one who did this, just as if I were present. So when you are assembled in the name of the Lord Jesus, and I'm with you in spirit, and the power of our Lord Jesus is present, Jesus is always present in his church, hand this man over to Satan. It doesn't... hand this man over to Satan. It's weird. What does that mean? Somehow do you condemn this person to hell? Is that? No, that's not what he's saying. The idea of handing this man over to Satan is put this man outside of your fellowship, outside of the connection. And when he's outside, he's out there where Satan is the god of this age, living out there separate from the community of believers. And hopefully through that, something will happen, right? Hand this man over to Satan so that the sinful nature may be destroyed and his spirit saved on the day of the Lord. And then he goes on, he confronts the church and he says, your boasting's not good. Don't you know that a little yeast works through the whole batch of dough? Get rid of the old yeast that you may be a new batch without yeast, as you really are. And And you know how that works, right? There's this thing that's going on in our church. I know that there's several of you who are making your own sourdough bread, and you have this little thing called a starter, right? And you feed it every week. You put flour in there with the yeast, and it grows over a couple of days, and then you share it with somebody else, and then the yeast gets in it, right? And you add more flour, and all you got to do is just keep. I got a daughter-in-law who's doing this, and it's fascinating. I listen to her. She makes amazing bread. I love it. I'm the beneficiary. She makes me a loaf of bread every single week. What a wonderful gift that I get. And she just keeps it going. Also, I just give her the flour. She just feeds the flour and puts the flour into it, and it keeps. That's what it does. It spreads through the flour, and it just keeps spreading. You can't get rid of it. Once it's in there, it's in there. His admonition is, get rid of the old yeast that you may be a new batch without it. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us keep the festival, not with the old yeast, the yeast of malice and wickedness, but with bread without yeast, the bread of sincerity and truth. We're going to come back and talk about this in a few moments, but this is a reference to the Passover, and we'll talk about it in connection to communion. He goes on and he says this, I've written to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral or greedy or swindlers or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world. In other words, there's people who are not in Christ do not have Christ's standards of living. That's just duh, right? It's like, of course, they're not going to live. They don't know anything differently. So I'm not talking about them. But now what I'm writing to you about, verse 11, is that you must not associate with anyone who calls himself a brother, somebody who says they're a part of the church, but is sexually immoral, greedy, idolater, slanderer, a drunkard, or a swindler. With such a man do not even eat. Probably lots of questions raising in your mind right now. What business is it of mine to judge those outside of the church? Are you not to judge those inside? Right? So this is a teaching that talks about the church and those that say they're a part of Jesus. Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside, so expel the wicked man from among you. Wow, that's pretty hard-hitting, isn't it? Kind of an uncomfortable passage of Scripture to read and to think about. And like, what do you do with this? And like, are you serious? And like, do we really behave like that? And are we supposed to act like that? And there's definitely this sense of like, if I'm going to live into this, of great discomfort. There's this sense of, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. But it's supposed to provide corrective measures. Three things to take away from this passage. First is there's a problem, right? It's clearly what this is about. Paul is addressing a problem. The vision is to cultivate meaningful relationships, but there's an obstacle in the way of meaningful relationships. There's a problem, and the problem needs to be addressed. The problem is that there's a follower of Jesus who's a part of the church who's living in egregious sexual sin. Egregious sexual sin. Paul identifies it as a kind of sexual sin that not even the culture around us participates in. That's how egregious it is, how off-center it is. One of the commentaries I was studying this past week writes this and gives this further insight. Parent-child incest was universally abhorred through the Roman world from the revulsion against the idea exhibited in the Greek Oedipus stories to slanders leveled against emperors. It was one of those few crimes that all cultures agreed were terrible. Its Roman legal punishment was banishment to an island, isolation, sent them out. Relations with stepmothers were treated like relations with mothers as incestuous. So the Oedipus stories are actually stories that were written. Okay, so you can go and you can read about them, and it's this folklore story, this mythological story in which there's a guy who's born and he's told that he's going to kill his father, and it gets all kind of goofy and crazy, but ultimately he ends up marrying his mother after killing his father, and it's kind of a goofy and strange story, but it's a story that took place written from Corinth. Remember, this is a letter to the church of Corinth. And so it's highly likely that Paul has in mind when he's speaking to the people, he's talking about a cultural thing. And even the culture of Corinth didn't participate in any kind of this incestuous sexual relationship. They saw it as being terrible, and you would get banished, get sent off to another island if you did this kind of thing. Cicero, another philosopher, he wrote this. He said, it's an incredible crime and practically unheard of in our culture. God, through Moses, gave to the nation of Israel these instructions, Leviticus 18, do not have sexual relations with your father's wife. Deuteronomy 22, a man is not to marry his father's wife. He must not dishonor his father's bed. Deuteronomy 27, cursed is the man who has sexual relations with his father's wife. And so this is the circumstance, this is the situation, this is what's going on. There's a guy who's engaged in this kind of activity, and everywhere you look, it said, don't do this stuff. This is wrong. It's not the right way to live. And so it's egregious. It's so out there. Paul confronts it. Says you can't allow this to happen. Now, I think there's an important application point. You should read in this along, especially for those of you who maybe are like, just kind of checking out God and the Bible and these kinds of things. And like who sets the standard for sexual morality? Like, who gets to say that? Like, why does he get to say this? Like, who is he to say that? I think it's a fair question. And for that matter, a lot of things in the Bible, like, who gets to say this is the standard? This is the way that you have to live? That's an important question. I mean, it's a really important question for people to consider in life. Ultimately, there are standards, are there not? Right? Our culture has a standard about sexual practice. Basically, our culture says that sex can be engaged in any way you want, with whomever you want, whenever you want. And nobody is to question that or say anything about it. Except, which is interesting, so culture comes up with a rule. There is an exception, right? You can't do it anytime, anyway. There is one exception. And you know what that one exception is? The other person has to agree. Right? If the other person doesn't agree, then that's sexual immorality. You've crossed the line. So who establishes the standard of what is moral, what is right? That's an important question for society to wrestle with. Obviously, we at Hope Community Church, we believe that there is a God who is over everything. He created all that is. He's revealed himself to us, and he's given us the directives for how to live life. He's given us the standards, and they're not intended to be controlling and diminutive and making your life difficult. Instead, they're intended to say, this is the way. You want to find meaning and purpose in life and satisfaction. This is the way to find that, rather than off over here. Most of the time, for most cultures, it's me. I get to determine. I get to decide. Here Paul says, look, God has a standard about how sex should happen. It should happen in the context of a relationship between a man and a woman who are married and not outside of that bounds, and especially not a man with his father's wife. Where's the father in this case? We don't know. Certainly this isn't the man's mother. This is the man's father's wife that the man is living in an ongoing sexual relationship with. The language gives us that indication, the way that the phrases are put together. This is an ongoing relationship. This is a problem. And then he offers the second thing, I think you take away from the text, is he offers a solution. What's the solution? Well, the solution is corrective discipline, right? I mean, this is the not fun part. What is the corrective discipline? The solution is to condemn the egregious sexual sin. This is the solution. You need to condemn it. You need to call it out. You need to say what it is. This is sex outside of the bounds that God has established. So there's a long list of verses here that kind of highlight this. He says, shouldn't you have been filled with grief? I've passed judgment on on the man who's doing this, right? And aren't you supposed to judge those who are in the church? So this teaching is for those that say they're followers of Jesus, who are a part of the church, who are living outside of the standards of Jesus. This is who this is for. And you should have by now condemned this rather than have been celebrating it. Second thing he says, and this gets really difficult, the church needs to confront the man and isolate him. Confront the man and isolate him. Now think about how hard that is. Think about how uncomfortable that is. And think about that as a parent, right? One of the things that we do as parents is we do isolate, we use this as a form of discipline, right? We isolate the child. You must go to your room. You must sit in this chair. And all this other fun activity with the rest of the family, the rest of the class goes on over here, and you are excluded. And you feel that guilt, that shame, the loss, all these things that you long for, and then that kind of helps you to go, I need to do what is right and get back in line, right? And so this form of discipline that he's suggesting can be very effective. We see it in parent-child relationship, teachers, coaches who use it and say you got to sit on the bench or you can't come to practice today because all these things, right? It's hard to do, though. Not only is it hard to do, it's really hard, like when you take this teaching and you think about the other things that he said when in verse 11 he talks about not only the sexually immoral, but the greedy, the idolater, the slanderer, the drunkard, the swindler. It's like, where does this stop? Where's the line? Like, is this what you're supposed to do with everybody that sins? Is just confront them all and throw them all out? Then who ends up being left in the church, right? And even talking about sexual sin, like there's lots of sexual sin. And so when we sin sexually, is this what's supposed to happen? I can remember being in high school in the local church that I grew up in. Actually, I think it was middle school. And one Sunday, this girl had to come up on stage along with her boyfriend who I'd never seen before. And she had to confess to the whole church that she was pregnant. Right? Why? Because the church leadership was exercising this principle. That's what I was later told. Right? And so she apologized, but you know what? I never saw her again. You think, so it was like, how effective was that? Like when somebody sins, when I sin, when you sin, what you need is you need the church, right? You don't need to get kicked out of the church. When I fall short, I need people to come around me, to encourage me and to help me. You know, what's interesting is that same story, fast forward a couple years in my life in that story, and the pastor who exercised this discipline was caught in a sexual relationship, and what did he do? He bolted. So this is complex, okay? It's not like quick, simple answers. Like you just as soon as somebody sins, this is what you do. You parade them up and you kick them out. But before we get too soft, we got to go. There still is something that needs to happen with discipline, and corrective discipline, or discipline can be corrective and very helpful. And in this case, it's egregious sexual sin, egregious, of a kind that not even our world is participating in. So Paul says, exercise this kind of correction. Isolate the man. And hopefully through the isolation, he will feel conviction and turn back to Christ. Which then takes us to the third point. And that is a point of application. And, The application of this text, it's helpful. It's illustrative. Paul uses an illustration. Because the application is this, like, if you allow sin to, like, hang out in your midst, then the sin is going to end up getting into you. That's what he's saying. Just like yeast, you can't have yeast in flour and not the yeast get into all of the flour. So if you're going to not only permit, but celebrate egregious sin, then that egregious sin is going to affect all of you. And this is going to destroy the whole church. So we can't have this. You can't allow this to happen. It needs to be cut out, to be removed, to be separated, so that this whole new loaf, this whole new loaf of bread with no yeast in it exists. And the imagery is that of Jesus, who is perfect, right? And he is the bread of life, the perfect bread of life. He lives a perfect, sinless life. He takes our sin. I'm going to invite our worship team up. And as I close, I'm reminded of this hymn. It was written by a lady named Fanny Crosby. She lived in the 1800s. She was blind. She wrote a ton of songs. But one of the songs that she wrote is called Rescue the Perishing. And there's a whole story behind this, to which there was a young man who had promised his mom before she died, had said something like, follow Jesus, promise to follow Jesus. And Fanny had been having a conversation with somebody, and this individual was talking about, like, we need to share the truth of who Jesus is. And she had this phrase. She came to this meeting where she was going to be talking, rescue the perishing, right? Care for the dying. And she was thinking about this boy and this story, and she penned these words. She said, rescue the perishing, care for the dying, snatch them in pity from sin and the grave. Weep o'er the erring one. Care so deeply over the person who's stuck in sin that you cry over them. You have grief. And tell them of Jesus, the mighty to save. Though they're slighting him, still he is waiting. He's waiting the penitent child to receive. Plead with them earnestly, but plead with them gently, because he will forgive if only they will believe. And then the song ends like this. Down in the human heart, crushed by the tempter, feelings lie buried. Oh, all the guilt, the shame, the hurt, the pain of life, all lie down there buried. The evil one continues to use it to keep us oppressed. But grace, the grace of Jesus. So touched by a loving heart, wakened by kindness, chords that are broken will vibrate once more. If you know somebody who is stuck in sin, or let me say this, if you ever find me in sin, I ask you to come after me. Come after me. It'll definitely be uncomfortable, it'll be difficult. But if I'm off, I'm living wrong, come after me. Show me that kind of love, that hard love, but you'll come after me. You'll seek me out. You'll confront me. Because maybe I'll listen. Maybe I'll listen. As we turn our thoughts to the table, to communion, the idea that Paul presented in 1 Corinthians 5, next slide please here, verse 7, when he says, get rid of the old yeast so that you can be a new batch without yeast as you really are. He says, Christ is our Passover lamb, and he's been sacrificed. This connects back to the story of Exodus coming out of Egypt, and there being a Passover in which there's this death angel that's going to go over and kill the firstborn unless an animal is sacrificed and the blood is painted on the doorpost. And so the nation of Israel was to celebrate this Passover year after year. And part of it, they would have bread that was unleavened bread, no yeast in the bread, not allowed, because they would be leaving the next day, fleeing from Egypt. And so the illustration here that Paul is giving to the church is that Jesus is this perfect bread, sinless, perfect. And he becomes the Passover lamb. He becomes the one who takes your guilt and your shame if you just receive him. And by coming into Christ, we put aside all the sinful ways of life and we find his grace and his forgiveness. And so we come now to the table to celebrate that, to remember that, to remind ourselves of how important it is. If you're here this morning and this is all new to you and you've never surrendered your life to Christ, I encourage you to do that. Just surrender your life to Christ. It'll be the biggest and most significant decision you ever make. It's radically transformative. If you're here today and you are a follower of Christ, you know what this means, man. This is a time for you to reflect about where you've fallen short, the sin in your life, and to confess that, and to be grateful that Jesus is that Passover lamb who's taken the penalty for your sin. The things the Bible teaches us about who God is that he is incredibly loving. But he's also just. So John tells us that when God came in flesh, he came in truth. This blend, this perfect blend, 100% grace, but 100% truth. What a beautiful picture. God desires perfection. Sin is missing that, right? So how we live needs to be towards that end, towards that vision of being full of grace and full of truth. And we come alongside each other and we need to perform, exercise corrective discipline. It's in love and grace and truth. So Hope, go this week. Have a good week.